Gustavo to the show. You can check him out if you're listening on just audio at drgustavo.com. That's Gustavo.com. But welcome to the show, Gustavo. And is it okay to call you Gustavo, or do you want to be called Doctor?
No, please call me Gustavo. Good to be with you, Ford.
All right. So let me tell you where the background came in. So for those of you that don't know, I run a marketing agency, and I also work with personal branding. And so Gustavo was actually a client of mine, and he came in, and after 3 days of being in my office, he said, Ford, I could probably help you with some of the communication challenges you're dealing with, some of the teamwork, some of the accountability. And so he did, and he did a great job for us. And now I want to share them with our community. So we are live right now on LinkedIn and Facebook and YouTube. So if you have questions, you can enter it below. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, on the Business Growth Show, by all means, put your comments in below and put your notes in there. So anyway, welcome to the show. This is an epidemic right now that people have with finding, retaining, and attracting top talent. And you're really known for the guy that boosts workplace culture. So let's just start with, what is workplace culture? Because that seems to be something that's so overused these days.
Right. Great question. So a lot of people think that culture is an amorphous thing, difficult to codify and define. Culture is very well studied and defined in psychology, anthropology, and other disciplines. Definition of culture is beliefs, behavioral rules, traditions, and rituals. Those four elements create culture. Beliefs are the way we see the world. Behavioral rules are the rules governing behavior. Traditions and rituals are things we do repeatedly. So there's your definition.
All right. But what does it mean to the average business owner? So we've got franchise owners and executives and small businesses who watch this show. And, they're always telling me that they're having trouble with employees because there's so many different generations in the marketplace right now, and they're trying to retain them. And, they have entitlement mentality. And now there's that whole term of quiet quitting, which I think is just another word. So what would you tell an organization that might be struggling to engage? Where do they start? Like, where's the first place someone should start to work on their culture, workplace culture?
Great question. So first, the whole quiet quitting, bare minimum Mondays, those are just new terms for disengagement. Great. It's a new marketing term for disengagement. Disengaged employees have been around for decades and generations. So we have more of them. There's no surprise to that. Where you start, we believe you start with human connection. You start with the connections you have with your current employees. You start by taking a genuine interest in them, have them taking a genuine interest in each other, and we rally around what we call a cause or a purpose. So the difference between mission and cause: mission is what you do, cause is why you do it. So if you want a unifying culture, you need to first build connections. Then you need to have a unifying cause. Why is it that people are doing the work they do?
All right. So should you start with an assessment, or, so they have a unifying cause and you sit down and they come, they create their mission, vision, and values, and they have these posters, but what do they do to actually identify the bad apples and then determine whether or not they can be coached to standard or not?
Great question. So here, I think we begin with the concept of fundamental attribution error. Okay, this is how we.
Yeah, that sounds complicated to me. Fundamental attribution error. So say it to me like I'm a 5-year-old. What does that mean?
That means that as people, we tend to make conclusions about other people rather than looking at their environment.
Okay.
And what we know is that environment drives behavior more than personality. So a lot of people believe personality is destiny, and it is not. We know that when we build the right environment for people, they will behave differently. You yourself, Ford, I'm going to guess, and for all your listeners, think about it. Do you behave differently in a boardroom, in a rock concert, and a sports arena?
Yeah, absolutely.
For most people, the answer is yes, and that's because it's different environments. When you change the environment, behavior follows. So in our businesses, the environment in which we live and work is called our culture. So when we change our culture, behavior will follow. So the bad apples, as it were, the C players, my experience is when you build a strong culture that they want to belong to, then those C players can become A players. And if they cannot adapt or choose not to adapt, then we do what I call, we set them free. But there's a process to that. Yeah, we coach, we train, we set them free. And that's because coaching is important, because it tells everybody else we're investing in our people. Training is important because it gives people they get to see that, oh, in our organization, we get to grow our skill sets. And it's during those two steps that people get to either adapt to your culture or not. And if they do not, then we set them free to go be successful in somebody else's culture, preferably a competitor. Let them deal with them.
All right. So I want to anchor the one key point you just made, which is environment drives performance. Is that what you said?
Behavior and performance.
Behavior.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So environment drives behavior. As I think, I like to keep things really simple. So environment drives behavior and drives performance. So the first place that an organization should start was evaluating their environment. Now, don't you think there's always a disconnect between what leadership thinks their environment is and what the employees think their environment is? I mean, because me as a small business owner, you said it yourself, who's always at the scene of the crime, Ford? What's the one common denominator that, keeps popping up when it comes to culture? And I think that's because organizations today don't know the difference, or at least a lot of leaders and things that I work with, and more on the marketing side, they don't know the difference between leadership, team building, management, change, communications. I mean, and then you throw culture in there. So there's like a lot of different topics. And so if environment drives the behavior and environment drives the performance, how do you first identify what the team thinks the environment is? And I'm a big believer is you got to start where you are now and where do you want to go? And then how are you going to get there? Right. It's basic 101. So if we all want to improve our culture because we want to retain and engage our staff and our employees, so our environment, what are some things that you look at when you work one-on-one? And I know, you're a top rated keynote speaker on leadership and culture, and you go into a lot of organizations and do deep dives and help them transform their cultures. And if you've just joined the show late, this is Fordify with Dr. Gustavo, drgustavo.com, drgustavo.com for the listeners. So back to this point, we know that environment drives behavior. We know that there's a difference between what the leadership thinks the environment is and the team thinks the environment is. So where do you go to get those into alignment?
So a couple of points. First, the difference between what leadership thinks the environment is, the culture is, and what the team thinks, that is referred to as the culture gap.
Got it. Okay. Makes sense.
Okay. So there's not always, there's very often a culture gap. The larger your organization, the more likely you're going to have a significant culture gap, because middle managers is where culture goes to die. Because at your level, Ford, in a large organization, leadership thinks they have a sophisticated understanding of culture, but leaders lead people, managers manage tasks. And culture is about, again, the environment influencing behavior and performance. That's the people. So we have to convert our managers into leaders. How do we do that? If I were coming to your place of work for the first time, it's for you and any of your listeners, and I called you, I said, hey, I'm totally lost. The first question you would ask me would be,
where are you now?
That's right. Where are you? So that's why, to your point, I want to emphasize, this is the point you just made.
Right.
You got to find out where you are. Okay. How do you do that? You do that. And unfortunately, this often cannot be done with internal people. It's got to be done with somebody external who's outside of the day-to-day dynamics of the office, dynamics of the business. So it's really about bringing somebody in to do some type of culture assessment. How are people getting along with one another? How is are the performance metrics clear? Are the goals clear? Do they get the support they need? Do they feel connected to each other? So there are lots of questions that people ask when it comes to doing a cultural assessment.
All right. So we know we're trying to identify the culture gap. And we obviously, the reason you bring someone in for the third party is because they're not politically charged, right? There's no preconceptions, that they can be neutral, just like when I go in to do an overhaul of someone's brand. All right. So we know you're going to do that. Is there a certain tool or assessment that you use or that you prefer?
I honestly, depending on the size of the organization,
right,
I like individual interviews or focus group interviews, specifically because they're completely customizable as opposed to a standard
off the shelf
questions that may or may not. Exactly.
Right. Okay. So I'm a firm believer in some assessments, but even then, they're just tools. And for those listeners, this is for educational and informational purposes only. We are not giving you legal advice, So please seek the competent professional for your legal advice. Okay, so that's our disclaimer, so no one can tell us that we're doing something that we shouldn't be doing. All right, so the reason you do those focus groups, those individual interviews, is because then you really get a chance to meet the leadership, meet the team, and to ask questions in confidence that help uncover that gap. And so
that's exactly right.
So once you've gone in and you've worked with an organization, and whether you started with the executive leadership or their mainline leadership, again, we know it depends on the size of the organization and the types of companies. I'm gonna be a contrarian. I think that there's definitely a gap in bigger companies, but I think even small companies, even people under 50 employees or under 20 employees, they may have a big gap, not because there's so many people, but because they've never really established a culture, right? They bought their business, they bought their franchise, they're wearing many hats, they're trying to do marketing and operations and finance, and they're doing so many different things that just by the sheer nature. So I know for me, I've been a small business owner now for, more decades than I can count. And one of the challenges I've always had is, people are good at one of three things: making the product or delivering the product or service, operations, which means leading and management, or marketing and sales. And most business owners are good at one or two, but the culture really has to come from putting on that executive hat. So I wear a lot of hats in my business, in my agency for primeconcepts.com. Yes, I'm the CEO of a marketing agency. As a Hall of Fame keynote speaker, I'm the solopreneur, right? It's my business. Yes, I've got a couple of assistants that work with me, but it's basically I'm getting the bookings. I'm going in and doing the keynote speeches and the workshops and the video training. But back to the agency, even an organization that has 6 to 10 people, and I've got 12 employees right now, you're so busy just taking care of projects and clients and onboarding new people and all the different things that culture sometimes takes a back seat. And, I think that that's unfortunate, because I think that what I've learned the hard way is that culture really has to be the front seat, right? Doesn't it? You have to start with the culture, right?
100%. So when the gap in small organization often happens because of subcultures, meaning people can develop their own subcultures that are not aligned with the overarching culture that you may want. So culture. And the other piece is, remember, culture's beliefs, behavior rules, traditions, and rituals. When you align your traditions and rituals, then onboarding, performance, it all becomes part of your standard practice. So when people are not aligned, then anyone in your culture, especially when you're a smaller organization, can stop negative behaviors that undermine your culture with culture-based statements like, we don't do that here. That's not how we roll.
Right.
Here.
It's
That's
not how we do things here.
This is how we operate here. This is the way we roll here. This is how things get done here. Those are all culture-based statements. And in a small organization, we want to empower our people to use culture-based statements to create alignment of these subcultures.
Yeah, because I think that that's the key is, it's just like someone's brand. I always tell people, you don't own your brand, franchise brand, you can influence your brand, but your brand is what your perception is in the mind of your prospects and customers. And I would say it's the same thing with culture. You don't own your culture. It's whatever your team or people think your culture is. Now you can influence it. And the goal of what you're saying is to create the target, show what success looks like, train them to standard, give them a set of dialogue rules that they can use. And then what gets rewarded gets repeated. So being able to create a culture in such a way that you're rewarding the good behavior so that everybody understands what the standard is. I think that that's one of the things that I learned when you worked with us was, one of the biggest takeaways I had was, because I was a type A critical person, you're like, no, Ford, you can't say that. You kept on saying you can't. And I'm like, well, why the hell not? I'm paying them a lot of money. They won't do what I want them to do. Why can't I do that? And you're like, look, you can do it if you want to corrupt your culture. But if you want to clean up your culture, you're going to have to learn some new skills. And so I think that that's the takeaway for a lot of the listeners is, if you're in leadership or if you're in management, certainly if you're in leadership or if you're the owner or executive leadership, this has to be a number one priority for you. And then you have to learn what to say. Now, I know that I'll turn it back over to you in a second. One of the things you taught me was to showcase the behavior that I want to see, teach it to the team, and then when someone isn't behaving, instead of doing my normal, why isn't this done? To say, well, that's not how we do things here, so that people started to understand that there was a standard and what's acceptable and what's not. Would you agree, or what do you think there?
100%. Yeah, I want to offer your listeners a metaphor.
Yeah, please.
I'm sure I've used it before. Culture's like a garden. As leaders in organizations, we are the ones that are responsible for preparing the soil, planting the seeds, and picking the fruit of the garden. That means we get the culture we create, we get the culture we cultivate, we get the culture we deserve. With that said, the key is if you ignore your culture for a week, what do you get? You get weeds. So as to what you were saying earlier, culture is always the first thing we need to consider. How does your communication, how you respond to a disappointment, how are you going to respond is going to influence your culture. And if you respond in a way that is perceived as hostile and unpredictable, then you will get a culture of compliance rather than a culture of creativity. And creativity is what's going to create our competitive advantage. If you want people to comply, you can yell at them all day long. They'll comply, but they won't take a step beyond the compliance. If you want a culture of creativity, then you have to manage your disappointments, frustrations, et cetera, in a way that will support them to continue to be creative as opposed to shut them down.
Now,
that's
one
a
of the
culture thing.
So one of the things I want to let our listeners to check out is your book. So tell me a little bit about your book. And I don't have a copy of it right in front of me, but it's Culture Trumps Everything, right? And so, there's a lot of, like we said earlier, there's a lot of skill sets in an organization. There's soft skills and hard skills, and there's all different types of modalities under change and leadership and team building and management and communication. But really, culture is the trump at the top of it. So tell us about your book and how does that work? Do you recommend that the leaders read it? Do you recommend the staff reads it? Tell me more about the book.
Yeah, so thanks for it. So let me just emphasize the point you just made is that all these things, performance, leadership, engagement, all the turnover, all these things come under the umbrella of culture. So the book is called Culture Trumps Everything. It really goes into all the factors that are critical to build a successful culture. Again, planting the seeds that we want in our garden, cultivating the fruit that we want, because if you ignore your garden, you get weeds. So culture not only changes our behavior, I go into in the book, I go into how it changes our biology. The fact is that we, in our business, because society runs on the economy, we have the ability to influence the culture in our society. And we talk about how we do that starting with our businesses, starting with the people in our business, and how to get the best performance, the best engagement, and ultimately the best profitability, because profit follows culture. At the beginning of the book, I talk about the profit paradox. Companies that pursue profit first make less. Companies that pursue culture first make more. And I have a whole slew of evidence for that.
No, I think that when you hear it, it makes total sense. So the book's available in Kindle and it's available in paperback. When are you going to sit in the studio and record the Audible version?
That is a really good question. I'm kind of in the process of writing another book at this point. So when I do the Audible for the second, I'll probably update the first and do the Audible for both.
Yeah, and I'm talking with a plumber with leaky pipes because I just have my new book Accelerate, and I rewrote a new version of Superpower on my book. And I went on Amazon. I'm like, oh crap, I haven't done the Audible book because I did like the first 6 chapters, and I need to go back and edit it. So that was mainly a call out to what I need to do. So, but that's good. So obviously, I mean, I'm a big Audible fan. I love to listen to books on the way back and forth to work. All right. So we've talked about that your culture, our environment drives behavior. Behavior drives results. If you're not getting the results you want, back it up into the culture. We understood that it affects every organization, large and small, and you have to lead from the top down, but you also want to create an environment that the bottom up raises a standard, right? What are some of the things you see going forward that organizations should think about with culture? I mean, right now, if you watch the news, you barely want to get out of bed, right? There's, the devaluing of the dollar and there's got the political stuff going on and all the things in the environment and with the money. And then you've got ChatGPT and AI is going to replace, there's going to be a new sentient being, and there's going to be a whole new species of aliens, which are basically, machine learning. To me, it's kind of overwhelming time as of this live broadcast. there's a lot of uncertainty in the air. I know for me, I pulled my team in when ChatGPT came out, and I said, "Hey guys, you have to learn some new skills." And Alex was like, "Hey, that's cheating." And I'm like, "Well, did you use the microwave today?" So how do you feel that AI is going to affect communication? And I realize this is totally from left field. So for those listeners out here, these are not prepared questions. I am just making crap up as I go. So you can call it crap, which is, a different acronym for something special. But so how do you, I see this disrupting organizations and how they communicate and what they think is real. And now there's avatars, and you can do customer service. And so just have you thought about the future of business and culture and how this might be affected?
Yeah, so let me start with I think the most immediate pressing problem for most organizations, large and small, is the hybrid workforce.
Yeah.
Okay. So the most immediate, like today, next year, and the next several years, it's going to be, how do we recruit and retain the best employees? And hybrid is going to be part of it. Citrix, a global consulting firm, did a survey published last year. 4,500 millennials and younger, 41 years old or younger, 90%, 90, said they want to work full time, but not full time at work.
Mm-hmm.
That's your future workforce. The hybrid workforce is here to stay. It's one of the trends that have been accelerated by the pandemic. So that's the most immediate. With regard to AI, again, AI is here to stay. I don't think AI is close to replacing humans, because although I've read recently that ChatGPT 4 has some semblance of what they call artificial general intelligence. Right now, AI is very specific in a very narrow field.
Right.
We don't have API quite yet. But I don't think AI is going to replace humans. It's going to replace humans that don't know how to use AI. Yeah,
and that's what I say. I have a whole episode on that. That it's not replacing humans. It's going to replace humans that aren't using it. I do know that, not to take us off the topic is culture, though. I do see, because I follow a lot of companies and people on this topic, because it's the wild, wild west right now. Anybody who says that they know exactly what's going to happen is just full of it, because there's so many changes rapidly. But when I see this thing, when ChatGPT went to 1 million users in a week, and now it's 100 million users or whatever it is now. It's faster than anything that's ever been done. And I've used it for a variety of different things, not just marketing. But what I would say is this, that the machine learning is going to be a factor. I think that virtual workforce that you just mentioned is a factor for culture. So what do organizations do if they have a external workforce? I know, like for me, I tried to do the hybrid workforce, but it was hard to hold them accountable. They were freelancing, they were working like 2 different full-time jobs while they were working for me. And so it was maybe the character of the person I hired, as opposed to the ability to have flexible work schedules. I just think that it's harder to drive culture with a virtual employee than the ones that are in the office. But I think the whole nature of the workforce is going to change.
Agreed. So again, yes, it is harder. It is not impossible. There are companies that have been doing it. There are companies that have been fully remote, fully virtual. So Automatic is a parent company of WordPress that has 70% of the websites back office. They're in 62 countries, 1,500 employees. They've never had a co-located location. They've never had a headquarters. So it is more difficult to do, which is why, again, being able to build a culture in a hybrid environment will be your competitive advantage.
That's an action step.
If you're looking for people to hire only in your backyard, so are others from outside your backyard.
Right.
The pool of talent is now national, if not global. If you are not looking in the ocean of talent, you're looking in a little pond, which just has much less talent.
Awesome. Well, for those of you wondering, we do go live on Fordify Wednesdays at 11 a.m. Central on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. And so any closing thoughts you'd have for our viewers and our listeners today on what they can do, other than, of course, get his book, Culture Trumps Everything. It's not a shameless plug, guys. It's a tool. If you don't have the performance out of your team, if things aren't running as smoothly, or if you have higher turnover than you should, start with that. Or, of course, you can always reach out to Dr. Gustavo at drgustavo.com. And you can check out his services and everything he offers. So give us some closing thoughts, and we'll wrap this episode up. But We know that culture, well, the biggest thing I'm walking away with is my environment drives behavior. And so I'm going to really go back and evaluate my environment.
Very good. So yeah, environment trumps behavior would be one point. I talk about it as how culture trumps personality. Your culture will change behavior regardless of personality. The strongest thing you can do to do that is to ritualize behavior. Ritualizing behavior means making it automatic. And that has to do with performance to a certain standard, which you mentioned earlier. That has to do with you as a leader displaying the behavior, you then having your employees experience the behavior, then ritualize the behavior comes through repetition to that standard, and then finally monitoring the behavior. So broad brushstroke, those are the 4 steps to ritualize behavior. It is the most powerful thing you can do, because once a behavior is ritualized, then people don't have to think of, oh, is it right or is it wrong? It just gets done.
That makes so much sense. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us on Fordify Live and on the Business Growth Podcast. This has been Ford, Saeks, and Dr. Gustavo. Thanks, everybody.